Chapter 19 of Inspector French's Greatest Case by Freeman, Wills, Crofts. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. Inspector French's Greatest Case, Chapter 19. French propounds a riddle. If Captain Davis experienced surprise on seeing French reappear at the door of his cabin, he gave no indication of his feelings. "Good afternoon, Inspector," he greeted him quietly. "Come aboard again? You should have stayed with us, you know." He smiled quizzically. "It would have been much less tiring than going all that way round by land, and for the matter of fact, a good deal cheaper. Found your criminals?" "Well, I've not," French answered slowly, "yet. But I hope to soon. Captain, I've had a wire from the yard that those people are on board after all." The captain frowned. "No doubt the yard is a wonderfully efficient organization," he said gravely. "But when it comes to telling me who is or is not aboard my ship, well, I think that's a trifle, shall we say, thick." "How do they profess to know?" "I'll tell you. I got a wire shortly after the ship left Havre on Saturday, and it said that one of the Liverpool detectives, Sergeant Mackay, was watching your ship before she sailed. He was looking out for a man also wanted for murder. Not this Wayne, a different person altogether. He saw the Waynes going on board, though of course he did not realize they also were wanted. But he saw them right enough. At least he was able to convince the yard as to their identity. Mackay waited until the ship sailed, and he states the Waynes did not go ashore. I know Mackay personally, and he is a most careful and accurate officer. I am satisfied that if he makes this statement, it is true. Now, none of your people saw them go ashore, and with all due respect to you and your purser, the suggestion is that they are still on board. The wire ended by instructing me to follow up the ship either here or to Lisbon and investigate further. You have certainly followed us up all right, but having overtaken us, I should like to ask, if it is not an indiscreet question, what you propose to do next?" French saw that if he was to retain the help of Captain Davis, he would have to be careful how he answered. "There, Captain, I was going to ask your kind help, though I feel I have troubled you more than enough already. I tell you what I was thinking over in the train. Suppose, for argument's sake, the yard is right, and that these people really are on board. It's obvious from your search that they are not here in their own characters, therefore they must be posing as two other people. That, I take, is what the people at the yard had in mind also. Well, this is not such an unlikely supposition as it sounds. The woman is, or rather was, an actress, and we know she is a clever one. Not only was she well thought of when on the stage, but she has recently carried off successfully a far stiffer test than that. She crossed from Newark to Southampton on the Olympic and convinced the people on board that she was English, and then she went on to London and convinced the people there that she was an American. I've seen the people in each case, critical, competent people who know the world, and each lot ridiculed the idea that she was not what she seemed. If she could do that, she could surely manage another impersonation. A comparatively simple disguise would do, so there would be nothing to make you or the purser suspect." The captain was listening with considerable interest, but it was evident that his ruffled feelings were not yet entirely smoothed down. "That may all be very well," he admitted, "but you have not taken into consideration the evidence of the bookings. 176 passengers booked from Liverpool, and in almost every case their tickets were taken and their staterooms reserved several days in advance. The exceptions in all cases were men. 176 passengers turned up, Mr. and Mrs. Wayne among them, but there were only 174 passengers on board when we left Liverpool. You follow what I mean? That all the other passengers on board are accounted for?" "I see that," French admitted slowly, "and you may be right. It certainly doesn't seem easy to answer what you say. At the same time, in the face of the instructions I've had from the yard, I dare not do other than go on and sift the thing further." "Naturally. But how?" "I don't know. I don't see my way clear as yet. For one thing, I shall have to meet every woman on board with the special object of trying to penetrate any disguise which may have been attempted. If that fails, I may give up the search, or I may try something else. I suppose you can take me on as far as Lisbon at all events?" With pleasure. The captain seemed to have recovered from his momentary irritation. Let me know if there is anything I can do to help you. Though I confess I think you are on a wild goose chase, I'll give you every facility I can. Thank you, Captain. You will understand that whatever I may think myself, I am not my own master in the matter. The only thing I should like at present is a chat with the purser over the passenger list. That, at all events, is easily arranged, answered Captain Davis as he touched a bell. The purser had not observed French's arrival and professed amazement on finding him on board. I begin to wonder if the ship's not haunted, he smiled as he shook hands. Mr. and Mrs. Wayne we leave behind in Liverpool, and you say they are aboard at Havre. You we leave behind at Havre. I saw you myself on the wharf, and here you are aboard at Leschios. What distinguished stranger are we to expect to find on board at Lisbon? I hope there will be a clearance of 4 at Lisbon, French rejoined. Though it sounds impolite, nothing would please me better than to change to a homeward bounder in company with my sergeant and Mr. and Mrs. Wayne. What? Do you still think they are on board? The inspector still thinks so, the captain intervened, and he wants to talk to you about it. Better take him to your cabin and give him any help you can. Right, sir. Will you come along, Mr. French? Mr. Jennings, in spite of his obvious competence, had a pleasant, leisurely manner which conveyed to the many who sought his counsel that though he may be busy enough at other times, he was not too hurried at that moment to give them his most careful and undivided attention. So he listened to French's story, and so he took out the passenger list and set himself to discuss the personalities of those enumerated thereon. I'll deal with the women first, French explained. You say that there are 67 on board, as against about twice as many men. Besides, I have more information about Mrs. Wayne than her husband. Now, if you don't mind, let's go on with them. The purser ran his finger down the list. Miss Ackfield is the first, he explained. She's a lady of between 50 and 60, I should say. You can easily see her, but in my opinion there is not the slightest chance that she could be otherwise than what she seems. French noted the particulars. Right, he said. Next, please. The next is Miss Bond. She's also pretty well on in years, but she couldn't be your friend because she's at least 4 inches taller. Then there is Mrs. Brent. She's a young girl. Her husband is on board, and they are evidently newly married. She's too young. They worked on down the list, provisionally eliminating the unlikely. Mrs. Cox was too small, Miss Duffield too short, Mrs. Eaglefield too stout, Miss Felton too thin, and so on. In the end, they had reached the number to 10, of which French had to admit that not one seemed in the least promising. There were indeed one couple who had at first appealed to him, Mr. Pereira de Silva and his daughter, Miss Maria de Silva, because they kept almost entirely to the cabins, mixing but little with the life of the ship. Mr. da Silva, a man of over 70, Mr. Jennings thought, was an invalid and had come on board with difficulty, leaning on a stick and his daughter's arm. He was practically confined to bed, and Miss de Silva was assiduous in her attention to him, reading to him and keeping him company, when many another similarly placed daughter would have been on deck or in the salon, amusing herself among the other passengers. The two had their meals together, and the lady, though friendly enough when she did go on deck, or when occasionally she sat in the salon, was but rarely seen. This was, thought French, a likely enough ruse for the fugitives to adopt, and his suspicions were strengthened by the fact that Miss da Silva's general appearance was not unlike that of Mrs. Wayne. But Mr. Jennings soon demolished his house of cards. The da Silvas were obviously Brazilian. They, or rather the girl, for the old man had been too feeble even to deal with the business of the tickets, spoke fluent Portuguese, the Portuguese of a native, and her English was not only broken, but was spoken as a Portuguese alone speaks it. Besides, she looked like a Portuguese. They lived at Rio, so Mr. Jennings had gathered, and had visited England to see Mr. da Silva's brother, a London merchant. They had booked on Para, near where other relatives lived, and from there they would return to Rio. They had taken tickets and reserved their stateroom some time before the Waynes. French was disappointed. He booked on to Lisbon on chance, then, not wishing to be seen, he retired to his cabin, leaving Sergeant Carter to watch the ladder leading to the shore boats. As he sat smoking beside the open porthole, he kept on racking his brain for some method of solving his problem, but at last it was a chance word of the purser's that gave him his idea. Mr. Jennings had dropped in just after the ship, pushing out between the two great stone walls of the harbour, had dipped her nose into the deep, slow-moving Atlantic swell, and he had said, talking of disguises, "It's a pity you couldn't disguise yourself and come into the Ceylon tonight, Mr. French. We are having our first sing-song, and you would have a good chance then of seeing the lady passengers." "That's rather an idea," French had replied. "Could you not hide me somewhere, say near the door of the salon through which those attending must enter, so that I could see each as she passed?" Mr. Jennings had believed it might be possible and had promised to see what could be done. And then, as he was taking his leave, the idea flashed into French's mind, and he had called him back. "Don't trouble about that business in the meantime, Mr. Jennings. Would it be convenient to you to call back again in half an hour? I shall have something to ask you then." Jennings glanced at him curiously, but all he said was, "Righto," as he went on his business. After the allotted span, he came back, and French spoke earnestly. "Look here, Mr. Jennings, if you could do something for me, you would put me under a heavy debt of gratitude. I'll tell you what it is. First, I want you to smuggle me into the salon before the concert begins, without anyone having seen me. I want to sit in some place where I can't be seen by a person entering until he or she is right inside the room. Is that possible?" "Why, yes, I think so. I'll fix it for you somehow. I take it your notion is that if a lady sees you so suddenly and unexpectedly, she will give herself away?" "Quite. But there is something else, Mr. Jennings. That scheme would only work if she knows my appearance, but I don't think she does. I want someone to read this out as an item. Will you do it?" He handed over a sheet of paper which he had covered with writing during his half-hour's wait. It read, "Riddle. A prize of 5-pound box of chocolates is offered for the best answer to the following riddle. If she is Winter in comedy, Ward in Olympic, Root in Savoy, and Vane in Crewe, what is she on the Enoch?" Mr. Jennings looked somewhat mystified. "I don't quite get you," he suggested. "Women's aliases and the places where she used them." Something like admiration showed up in the purser's eyes. "My word, some notion that, if the woman is there and hasn't smelt a rat, she'll give herself away when she hears that. But why don't you read it yourself? If she makes a move to leave, I want to be out before her. If she leaves, it will mean that her husband is not present, and I want to get her before she can warn him. Carter will be on the same job." "Well, I'll read it if you like, but frankly, I'd rather you had someone else to do it." "What about Captain Davis?" Jennings glanced round and sank his voice. "If you take my advice, you'll leave the old man out of it altogether. He just might not approve. He treats the passengers as his guests, and bluffing them like that might not appeal to him." "But I'm not bluffing them," French retorted with a twinkle in his eye. He drew a pound note from his pocket and passed it over. "That's for the chocolates, and whoever puts in the best answer gets it. It'll all perfectly straight and above board. Whether we get the woman over it or not, no one need ever know." The purser smiled, but shook his head doubtfully. "Well, it's your funeral. Anyway, I've said I'll go through with it, and I will." "Good." French was once more his hearty, complacent self. "Now, there is another matter if this one fails. Mrs. Vane may stay in her cabin. I want you to check the women present by your list and give me a note of any absentees. Then I'll go round the cabins and make some excuse to see each." The purser agreed to this also. "I'll send you some dinner here at once," he added as he rose to take his leave. "Then I'll come for you while the passengers are dining, and get you fixed up in the salon. Better send Carter here, and he can dine with me while I explain the thing to him." When Mr. Jennings had gone, French stood in front of his porthole, gazing out over the heaving waters. Daylight had completely gone, but there was a clear sky and a brilliant full moon. The sea looked like a ghostly plain of jet with, leading away across it, a huge road of light, its edges sparkling with myriad flashes of silver. His cabin was on the port side, and some 3 miles off he could dimly trace the white line of surf beating along the cliffs of the coast. The sea looked horribly cold, and he turned from it with a slight shudder as the door opened and Sergeant Carter entered. "Ah, Carter, Mr. Jennings is sending us in some dinner. We'll have it together. I have a job on for tonight," and he explained his plan and the part his subordinate was to play therein. Carter said "Yes, sir," stolidly to everything, but French could see he was impressed. Shortly before 8, Mr. Jennings appeared and beckoned his fellow conspirators to follow him. They passed quickly across the deck and along some passages and reached the saloon unobserved. There they found that the purser had placed 2 armchairs for their use close to the door, but hidden from outside it by screens. From French's chair, the face of each person who entered the room would be visible, while Carter's was arranged so that he could see all those of the seated audience which were out of French's immediate purview. The concert was timed for 8:30, and before that hour, a little group of people began to arrive. French, with a novel open on his knees, sat scrutinizing unostentatiously each person as he or she entered. Once he stared with increased eagerness as a dark, stoutish woman entered with 2 men. It seemed to him that she bore some resemblance to the photograph, but as he watched her foreign gestures and as he listened to her rapid conversation in some unknown language, he felt sure she could not be the woman he sought. He called a passing steward and learned from him that she was the Miss De Silva whom he had already suspected and acquitted in his mind. As the time drew on, the saloon gradually filled, but nowhere did he see anyone whose appearance he thought suspicious. When the hour arrived, the proceedings were opened with a short recital by a well-known pianist who was making the voyage to Madeira for his health. French was not musical, but even if he had been, he would have paid but scant attention to the program. He was too busily engaged in covertly scrutinizing the faces of the men and women around him. He was dimly conscious that the well-known pianist brought his contribution to an end with a brilliant and highly dexterous feat of manual gymnastics, that 2 ladies, or was it 3, sang, that a deep-toned basso growled out something that he took to be a Scotch song, and that a quite rather pretty girl played some pleasant-sounding melody on a violin, when his attention was suddenly galvanized into eager life and fixed with an expectant thrill on what was taking place. Mr. Jennings had ascended the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," the purser said in his pleasantly modulated voice, "while possibly it may be true that the days of riddles have passed, and while it certainly is true that the middle of a concert is not the happiest time for asking them, still, perhaps you will allow me to put this one to you. It's a topical riddle concerning a voyage made up by one of a company, and he offers a prize of this large box of chocolates for the best solution. The riddle is this, and I can let anyone who cares to consider it have a copy. If she is Winter in comedy, Ward in Olympic, Root in Savoy, and Vane in Crew, what is she aboard the Enoch?" The audience listened with good-humored attention, and for a moment Mr. Jennings stood motionless, still smiling pleasantly. The little buzz of conversation which usually sprang up between the items had not yet begun, and save for the faint, all-pervading murmur of the engines, the gently swaying saloon was momentarily still. Then, through the silence, came a slight, though unexpected sound. Mr. Silva's handbag had slipped off her knee, and the metal hasp had struck the parquet floor with a sharp tap. French glanced at her face with a sudden thrill. It had gone a queer shade of yellowish-brown, and a hand, hanging down by her side, was clenched till the knuckles showed the same livid brownish hue. She evidently had not noticed her bag fall, and in her fixed and staring eyes there grew the shadow of a terrible fear. No one but French seemed to have noticed her emotion, and a man beside her stooped to pick up the bag. At the same time, the silence was broken by a stout, military-looking old gentleman who, with some ha-has and begards, adjured the company to set about solving the puzzle, and conversation became general. Mr. Silva rose quietly and moved rather unsteadily towards the door. For French to get up and open the door for her was an act of common politeness. With a slight bow, he held it as she passed through, then, following her immediately, he closed it behind him. They were alone in the passage leading to the companionway, and as he glanced keenly at her face, he felt no further doubt. Disguised by some adroit alterations to hair and eyebrows, and he believed, with a differently shaped set of false teeth, a darkened complexion and glasses, there stood before him the original of the photographs. He laid his hand on her arm. "Miss Winter," he said gravely, "I am Inspector French of Scotland Yard. I arrest you on a charge of being concerned in the murder of Charles Getting and the theft of precious stones and money from Messrs. Duke and Peabody on the 25th of November last." The woman did not reply, but like a flash, a free arm went to her mouth. French grasped wildly and caught it. She gulped, and at the same moment reeled. French, himself trembling and with beads of perspiration on his forehead, laid her gently on the floor, where she lay unconscious. He hastily stepped back into the saloon and moved quietly to where he had seen the ship's doctor sitting, whispered in his ear. Sergeant Carter got up at the same moment, and a second later the two detectives stood looking down with troubled faces while Dr. Sandyford knelt beside the motionless figure on the floor. "Good God!" he cried at once. "She's dead!" He put his nose to her lips. "Prussic acid." She gazed up at his companions with a countenance of horrified surprise. "Yes, suicide," said French shortly. "Get her moved to my cabin before anyone comes." The doctor, ignorant of the circumstances, looked at the other with a sudden suspicion, but on French's hurried explanation he nodded, and the three men bore the still form off and laid it reverently on the sofa in the inspector's stateroom. "When you have examined her, tell the captain," French said. "Meantime, Carter and I must go and arrest the poor creature's husband. You might show me his cabin when you are through." A few seconds sufficed the doctor for his examination, and then in silence he led the way to a cabin on the boat deck. French knocked, and instantly opening the door, passed inside, followed by the others. It was a large, roomy stateroom, fitted up as private sitting room, an open door revealing a bedroom beyond. The room had a comfortable, used appearance. Books and papers lay about, a box of chessmen and a pack of cards were on a locker, while in a lounge chair lay a woman's crochet work. On a table stood an empty coffee cup, and the smell of a good cigar was heavy in the air. In an armchair under the electric light, clad in a dressing gown and slippers, sat an old gentleman, the cigar in one hand and a book in the other. He seemed a tall man, and his long hair was pure white. He wore a long white beard and moustache, and had bushy white eyebrows. He sat staring at the intruders with surprise and apparent annoyance. But as his eyes settled on French's face, their expression changed. Amazement, incredulity, and a growing horror appeared in rapid succession. French advanced, but the other sat motionless, his eyes still fixed on his visitors with a dreadful intensity, like that of an animal fascinated by a snake. And then French began to stare in his turn. There was something familiar about those eyes. They were a peculiar shade of dark blue that he recalled very clearly, and there was a mole, a tiny brown mole beneath the corner of the left one, which he had certainly seen not long previously. So, for an appreciable time, both remained motionless, staring at one another. Suddenly, French recalled where he had seen that shade of iris and that mole. With a murmur of amazement, he stepped forward. "Mr. Duke!" he cried. The other, with a snarl of anger, was fumbling desperately in his pocket. Like a flash, French and Carter threw themselves on him and caught his arm as it was halfway to his mouth. In the fingers was a tiny white pilule. In another second he was handcuffed, and French's skilful fingers had passed over his clothes and abstracted from his pocket a tiny phial containing a few more of the little white messengers of death. At the same moment Captain Davis appeared at the door. "Shut the door, if you please, Captain," French begged. "The yard was right after all. This is the man." A few sentences put the captain in possession of the facts, and then French gently, and with real kindness in his tones, broke the news of Miss Winter's death to his unhappy prisoner. But the man expressed only relief. "Thank God," he cried with evidently overwhelming emotion. "She was quicker than I. Thank God she was in time. I don't care what happens to myself now that she is out of it. If it wasn't for my daughter," his voice broke, "I would be thankful it was over. I've lived in hell for the last few months. Wherever I turn, I see Getting's eyes looking at me. It's been hell, just hell. I shouldn't wish my worst enemy to go through with what I have. I admit the whole business. All I ask is that you get on and make an end quickly." The whole scene had been enacted so quickly that French, after his first moment of overwhelming surprise, had not had time to think, but presently, after the immediate exigencies of the situation had been met, the mystery of this amazing denouement struck him even more forcibly. He felt almost as if he had glimpsed the supernatural, as if he had been present and had seen one raised from the dead. Mr. Duke was dead, at least so until a few minutes earlier he had unquestionably believed. The evidence of that death was overwhelming, and yet it was false. What trick had the man played? How had he managed so completely to deceive all concerned as to the events of that mysterious crossing from Harwich to the Hook? French felt it would not be easy to control his impatience until he learned how the thing had been done, and the more he thought of the whole problem, the more eager he grew to be back at the yard so that he might once again attack it, this time with the practical certainty of clearing up all the features of the case which still remained obscure. The next afternoon they dropped anchor at the Tagus off Lisbon, and there French transferred with his prisoner to a homeward bound liner. On the third morning after, they were in Liverpool, and the same night reached London. The end of chapter 19.